Welcome back to Close Up. After losing the White House, the U.S. Senate, and getting wiped out at the State House, New Hampshire Democrats are clinging to any good news they could get coming out of this election. One notable win was notched by Congressman Chris Pappas, who is headed back to Washington after yet another decisive victory. And he's our guest this morning. Congressman, thanks for coming in.
It's good to be with you, Adam.
So as you read it, what was the message sent by the voters on Tuesday?
Well, look, I think for our race, the message was people trusted the leadership that I have been providing. They understand that I'm a pragmatic voice in Washington. And I think across the board, people want answers to the challenges that we face. The economy, I believe, was a dominant issue. Folks understand that there's some good numbers in our economy, but we've got a lot more work to do to address the high costs of a range of things that people experience, including housing, childcare, education, healthcare. So I hope that's where our focus can be as we get down to work in the next Congress. And I do think that New Hampshire voters split their tickets. We saw the same pattern prevail in this election that's really prevailed through the last 3 elections in New Hampshire, which is Republicans winning at the state level, Democrats holding all the federal offices and winning the presidential race.
There's a lot about you that's unique, and in some ways your success can't be replicated by everybody. That's obvious. But what are some of the lessons that other Democrats in New Hampshire need to borrow from you in order to win, and instead of what they got?
Well, for us, you know, as someone who understands New Hampshire, knows our communities, I think it's about showing up. It's about listening to people. It's about being a member of Team Normal and focusing on how you can take the voices of the people of New Hampshire with you to actually get some things done. And I think people have great urgency around the challenges that we face. And we've seen another election now that appears to be a change election on top of a number of change elections over the last 10, 20 years in this country. And so I think voters are pretty unsettled. They want to see some positive progress. And we've got a responsibility to work with the new administration in Washington to try to get down to business and to make some things happen in a positive way. But I think for us, it's been about building a relationship with the voters of New Hampshire, understanding that the solutions are somewhere in the middle. And I've been proud that we've always built a campaign that has support from Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. That's how you win tough races in a state like New Hampshire. And I think that's also how you bring people together around solutions that can actually improve people's lives.
As Democrats do their post-mortem, what needs to change to really reconnect the party with its working class roots that it seems to have drifted from a little bit?
Well, I think we are connected in terms of the agenda that we've been presenting. We stand for workers' rights. We stand for good wages and benefits for working class Granite Staters and Americans. We're fighting to make sure that everyone has health care, that we're lowering costs, investing in housing and child care. And so I think that's an agenda that is going to work. But I think we also have to recognize that, elections are often more than just a bunch of policy proposals. It's about how you connect directly to people. And so I do think that there is a cultural connection with Donald Trump in this country that Democrats have to reckon with for the future. We have to understand what went wrong in this election and figure out how to recalibrate. And I do think that there are opportunities here to find common ground, but there are also going to be opportunities over the next couple of years where we need to stand up for working people in the middle class when we see things going in the wrong direction. Some of the proposals around tariffs and tax cuts for the wealthy aren't going to serve people that need us to be investing in housing and to expand access to child care. So we've got to make sure we're fighting the fight over the next couple of years with respect to ensuring this economy works for everyone and also showing up and listening to the people of New Hampshire about their concerns.
There's a lot of hand-wringing right now over the extent to which identity politics has intruded upon the Democratic message. Here's a quote from your colleague Seth Moulton the other day. Quote, "I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that." What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are we're better off when everyone's included in the destiny of this country. And I think that's something the people of New Hampshire fundamentally support. But I don't think we need to go down the path of having politicians be pushing an agenda that's dividing us. Let's let communities, teachers, coaches, athletic leagues decide what's best. We don't need Congress weighing in on this when we have so many other pressing issues that we need to address for the American people. So I think we can move forward in a way that respects people's differences, understands that everyone should be able to be themselves while focusing on what really matters.
The conversation about the future of the party, some people have suggested the best antidote, the medicine for Democrats to take is to get another presidential primary started here. Should there be even more emphasis now with the DNC about bringing First in the Nation officially back to New Hampshire to sort of jumpstart this process?
Well, of course. And, you know, this process has always been about the people. It's been about the kind of conversations that happen here in New Hampshire. And now we're facing, in 4 short years, an open primary on both sides, where Donald Trump won't be able to run for re-election, where there will be an open Democratic contest too. And so all the more reason why we need a robust conversation around where to go for the future. And the people of New Hampshire need to be part of that conversation. It doesn't mean we decide for the rest of the country, but it means that we bring the conversation into our living rooms, into our businesses, and that makes for better candidates and leaders for the future. So I think this process is battle-tested over time. We've had it for more than 100 years, but I think we add value, and we're going to be doing everything possible to make sure that New Hampshire remains first. And part of that is inviting candidates to come to our state. And we've seen a number of top Democrats visiting New Hampshire just over the last few months. And I think as people, you know, begin to think about the future, and hopefully it's not too soon. We just went through an election after all. But when the time is right, we want to make sure that leading Democratic candidates feel right at home here in New Hampshire and have access to the voters. And I think that's going to go a long way toward helping to restore our First in the Nation primary status.
Circling back to getting things done, how do you approach a second Trump administration?
Well, I'll be guided by my oath to the Constitution of the United States and my responsibility to the people of New Hampshire. So that will be my North Star as I think about how we enter this term, which I think has taken on new significance given the fact that Donald Trump's in the White House. We have seen him blow through a lot of guardrails during his time in political office. He was impeached twice after all. And we've got to make sure that he is doing what the American people expect him to do. We should be finding common ground, and I believe we can seek it out when it comes to the challenges that we face as a nation. But we also have to make sure that we're putting the needs of the American people first and that we're upholding our institutions. And so I think it's a tall task, but it's something that I think Democrats and Republicans are ready for.
We're a long way off from 2026, but you know, you've got a much more Republican legislature in Concord. It's very likely the redistricting map we didn't see pass a couple of terms ago might come back. Are you going to fight through another election even if you're in a much redder district in 2026? Well,
I don't think anyone wants to think about the next one. After we've just been through such a tough election cycle, people are ready for an opportunity to get back to life as we knew it before all the ads were on TV and it was you know, such a hard-fought election contest. But look, we'll think about future opportunities at the right point in time. We're still trying to learn what the makeup of Congress looks like. And so, you know, figuring out what the next 2 years are going to bring is really important for me to figure out how I can best serve the needs of the people of New Hampshire. So I have a job to do, and I'm really honored with the vote of confidence that I received from the people of New Hampshire. I'm gratified by the large turnout that we had in the Granite State, and I'm committed to this work, and there will be a time for politics at some point in the future.
All right, Congressman Chris Pappas, thanks for joining us on Close Up.
Thanks, Adam.
Appreciate it. And we'll be right back with Scott Spradlin.